Welcome back to another Giant Monsters Monday here on Outside the Box Reviews, and today we are looking at 3 figures instead of the usual 2. We have the Bandai Creations Wave 4 Godzilla 1968, the Bandai Creations Wave 4 Hedorah, and the Bandai Japan Movie Monster Series Anguirus. And in setting these figures up, I realized right off the bat I made a kind of mistake in my ordering of things, even though I didn't know I was going to get this Anguirus figure, but it would have been perfect if I would have left out Hedorah and brought in Gigan, because this would have been the perfect setup for a Godzilla vs. Gigan video. But since we already reviewed Gigan back with Jet Jaguar, we'll be taking a look at the Smog Monster today. So let's dive into all 3 of these figures and see how they stack up. First up, let's take a look at Hedorah, the Smog Monster, whatever you want to call him. This thing is a bit of a disappointment in my Godzilla collection. Godzilla vs. Smog Monster is actually one of my favorite Godzilla films. It's really campy, really stupid, and really just a lot of fun in my opinion. And this thing was teased. It was possibly coming out, but maybe not. It wasn't showing up in stores. I had dreams of running to KB Toy Store and finding this guy on the shelves, going to check out and finding out that I had no money on me. I mean, it was bad. I obsessed over getting a Hedorah figure for quite a while, and I don't know why I keep calling it Hedorah, because that's like the overly dubbed version of it. I normally do call him Hedorah. But anyway, I was so excited to get this figure, and for the longest time after getting him, I kind of gave him a bit of a pass because I really had wanted him. But the more I look back at it, it's a pretty crummy figure. First off, there's absolutely no articulation. I wouldn't really expect any because he is a big amorphous blob, but the silhouette of him is kind of goofy. Bandai Japan's version of this has a kind of hump back here, big sludge bucket kind of thing going on, which I think is a lot cooler looking. The arms are also outstretched. I think I might eventually go splurge on that one. It's actually not too bad to get right now. But he's got his big red eyes they would shoot lasers out of. I do like this little puff here at the top. It almost looks like it's gonna swell up and burst and just be full of toxic goo. The paint on him is not bad. There's mostly a gray body with a lot of different colors. He's got the green here on top. He's got blacks. He's got reds. Just making him look really slimy and trashy and filthy. The sculpt overall isn't horrible. It does give the appearance of the suit a little bit, but it's not really that accurate. And then we have horrible seams in here. This whole upper section, you can see a very heavy seam going through here. And then on each of the arms, there's a big thick seam down here where the elbow would be. And then we even have another one back here on the tail, which is a lot less obvious, but still there. And for a figure that doesn't articulate, that's kind of obnoxious. We of course have nothing on the bottom, just plain flat black. But overall, I wish I could enjoy this figure more. It's one of my favorite Godzilla villains, and here he just seems like he comes up a little short. I'll have to pick up that Japanese one and review him and see how it actually stacks up compared to this, but it's a bit of a bummer. At least I do get to have the character on my shelf for the time being. And as I've said with all these Bandai creations, they're inexpensive. They're really easy to come by when they are in stores, so it wasn't really that hard or expensive to get my hands on this one. Next up, we've got Godzilla 68, or as I've called him, Cookie Monster Godzilla, just because he really does look like the Cookie Monster. This is the period in the Godzilla suits where they were going more kid-friendly. This is the more gentle Godzilla, and it really shows in the design. He's got the big rounded head, the long neck. His dorsal fins are actually puffy. They're almost overly inflated in this middle row. They're very tiny on the outer rows. They went from looking sinister to just kind of looking friendly almost. And I can't fault this figure on capturing the goofiness of the Godzilla suit, because it definitely does, but it's got some lacking areas. If I remember correctly, this suit was theoretically used in 4 main movies. It was used in Destroy All Monsters, which is the 1968 film I refer to. It was used in Godzilla's Revenge, which was mostly stock footage with a couple extra fight scenes filmed, so not really much there. Godzilla vs. Hedorah, which is why I have these together, and Godzilla vs. Gigan, the last appearance of this suit, where it was literally falling apart on screen. But in some of those films, they actually did manage to capture an ominous look to this suit. In Destroy All Monsters, there are some creepy shots of it where it looks dangerous, and this figure has a hard time looking like that at all. It does have some decent texturing on the skin, a very rough Godzilla look. This is about when Bandai Creations started really shortening up the tails. They wouldn't let them flow out. They would curve them very deeply and make them a little shorter than they should be just to fit them in the package, which is a bit of a bummer. We have the three-toed feet. We have kind of the scuff marks on the knees here. The four-fingered hands, which I always thought was weird, having the four fingers and the three toes. And as I said, the head is just a little goofy looking. He's got the very big black eyes there. The fact that they have to do the pink gums with the white teeth painted on really doesn't help this figure, and I think they could have gone with a darker color than this bright pink. He has a little pug nose. It's kind of a ridiculous head sculpt. It's not too far off from what was in the film, but I just don't love the way they captured it. I think it could have been done better. For articulation, it's pretty limited. We have a rotation in the shoulders, rotation at the hips, and then we could rotate at the base of the tail. And last but not least, we have the Bandai Japan Movie Monsters Anguirus figure. And it's really weird to have this in hand after dealing with those other two. I don't think I mentioned it on the 68 Godzilla, but it is the largest Godzilla I have in my collection in this rough 6-inch scale, with the exception of maybe the new 2014 version. He is a tall figure, and having him next to this Anguirus, he just feels so tiny. But I really dig this figure. This is definitely a figure from a more simple sculpt. The copyright on this figure is 1998, but I believe the mold is actually significantly older than that, so we're looking at maybe early 90s figure design here, so there's a little bit lacking in it. But he's got his crest of horns up here, he's got his big eyes on there, his nose horn, his yellow teeth with the fangs going on, and the brown they use inside of his mouth kind of just blends away. It's not as obvious as some of the other Godzilla figures where it's very clear there's extra vinyl in there. This is much better looking in my opinion. It's a great scale texture to him. A little light here on the head, but very thick and big here on the body. He's got his four clawed toes here and a nice white, but it is bled a little onto the hand. See a nice kind of pattern to his underside. I like this kind of sagginess here, looking like the suit with some black spray on there. And one thing I really dig about this version of Anguirus is that they captured the way he walked in the suit, that the actor would basically be on his hands and knees, so the feet are actually coming out backwards. Really cool looking. I like that touch because that is very suit accurate, and it's something that you never know when they're trying to make a toy. Sometimes they try to make it look more how it would be realistic, I guess, but this is pretty darn cool in my mind. On the back here, we have his carapace full of sharp little spikes. Very nice looking. They painted it in a very beautiful gold color. Brown on the underside, but brilliant gold up top. Now, I've seen many different variations of this figure, and they've done different colors in the spikes. They've done a more plain yellow, more of the bone like they've done on these pieces, but I'm digging the gold. The gold is pretty sweet. The tail, more scales going up. It's kind of a short tail, and then the gold just sprayed on top, so it's not as clean looking as the actual shell. It definitely just looks like they ran some gold paint down the middle of the tail, but still pretty good looking. And there's some overspray here on these back toes as well, just like the front ones. But this, to me, is another example of the quality of work that goes into the Japanese figures. It doesn't quite get translated to the American ones. This is a much older sculpt. It's a little goofy looking in some respects, but it captures something of the character that I think is just perfect. And I really dig this figure. For articulation, he can swivel at the arms, or the front legs, I guess, and the hind legs, even though that's kind of useless with this figure. And that's about it. He has a seam around his neck, but it does not turn, so nothing really there. I've seen people try to put him in an upright position, and it just looks really stupid, so we're not going to do that. So it is kind of interesting to have all three of these figures lined up, because these are three of my favorite giant monster characters. Of course, Godzilla, and this suit, even though I think it's a little goofy now, it's one of the two suits that I saw the most growing up. I think I've already said that the Godzilla movies I had as a kid were Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Godzilla vs. Gigan. Those those were the two I had official VHS copies of and the ones I watched the most. So even though I think it's kind of a goofy look for Godzilla and they didn't translate it perfectly over to vinyl, I kind of have a soft spot for the design. Hedorah, another one, as I said, one of my favorite Godzilla villains, and Anguirus is my favorite sub-character, my favorite sidekick. Just always been one of my favorites, probably because of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. But I'm going to go ahead and give the Godzilla himself and the Anguirus the cult classics nod. Anguirus gets a very solid one. The Godzilla, not quite so much. He's teetering on the edge there, but he's not bad enough to damn him that badly. Hedorah just has some severe flaws, so he's going to be Mystery Science Theater fodder, which is about what that movie was anyway. But I really am curious to go try to track down the Japanese one and do a comparison, or at least review that one on his own, because from what I've seen, the Japanese one is a much better take on the character. If this figure didn't have the heavy seams in it, he probably would have been bumped up to the next level, but the seams really just kill this thing for me. For a non-articulated figure, you shouldn't have that big of seams in it. It's just ridiculous. And for the longest time in my collection, I only had one of the Bandai Japan Godzilla figures, and it was mostly these creation figures, but the few I've picked up in the last few months have really made me want to concentrate more on trying to find some of those figures and add them to my collection, because after getting the Jet Jaguar and the Anguirus, I'm starting to realize that there definitely is a big quality shift between the American and Japanese releases, almost uniformly. There's a few exceptions where I've seen American releases that at least have some better elements going on for them, if nothing else, but I think Bandai Japan is the way to go when it comes to this stuff if you're actually seriously collecting it and not just wanting to pick it up quick. Make sure you check me out on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And after surviving Zombie Week last week, this whole next week here on Outside the Box Reviews is going to be dedicated to more horror, just generalized horror, continuing my unofficial Halloween in April. So make sure you join me all week long for horror reviews and come back next Monday for another Giant Monsters Monday. Sayonara.